Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to Energy Speaks Back, powered by Hark. My name is Paul Webb. I'm the founder of B2B Energy, and I'm your host. Wherever you're listening to this podcast today, I truly hope you are safe. We would like to thank our episode sponsors today, Ester Energy. This is episode 49, where we weekly present to you experts from around the world. And today, it really gives me great pleasure to interview an old colleague and a close friend of mine from my days at Satchwell Controls, now Schneider. The purpose, as always, is to provide a good understanding of energy management knowledge from around the world, which is available today for us to deliver savings that impact on our planet. My guest today is, as I said, a close friend who has worked in senior levels in the control industry and has become a successful sales manager in our industry today. So without any further ado, I give you Peter Morrell. Good afternoon, Peter, and how are you?
Good afternoon, Paul. I'm very well. Thank you very much. Thanks for asking. And thanks for inviting me onto this podcast.
You know, we haven't seen each other for quite a few years. And I remember every day we used to be on the phone chatting and discussing what's going on in our business. So it's really good to see you, Pete. You're looking well. No different to, I think, 2005 when we used to work together.
It was a long time ago. No, 16 years ago now. So, yeah.
And how do you feel? Do you feel the same person?
I do, actually. I think I've always thought that, I sort of get to the age that I'm at, and I won't tell you how old that is now, but it's getting on a bit. But I just don't feel any different than from when I was 20 something, to be honest with you. My body doesn't do the things that it used to be able to do, but the head's still in the same place.
Are you still driving them many miles though?
Well, this last 12 months, clearly not, no. But I mean, the mileage has come off a lot. But I was doing, crikey, anything between 25 and 35,000 miles a year for year after year after year, and it's that was getting a bit hard. With the traffic on the roads these days and so on. But so this last year has been quite refreshing, really, and I think a big challenge for everybody. But working from home pretty much all of the time and not getting out and seeing customers, but doing it over links like this, Zoom, MS Teams, has been quite different. But actually, pretty much almost as effective. I still don't think there's a substitute for looking at the whites of their eyes over the table.
Yeah.
But actually, I don't think it's been as big a barrier to doing the work as perhaps many thought it might be. That's my experience.
I totally agree. I've had the same feeling. And for the benefit of our listeners today, Peter worked for me for about 2 years in the energy services business for Satchwell and for Invensys. And I always describe Peter as the Trevor Brooking of the industry. And if anyone knows football, Trevor Brooking was a very professional and a gentleman in his approach to football. And Pete, you've always been a gentleman as far as I'm concerned regarding your sales approach within this industry. So it's really great to be having this opportunity to interview you today.
Well, thank you for that, Paul. I've never heard you describe me in that way before, but I think that's a compliment. So thank you very much for that. Yeah,
you're welcome.
It's been good. It's been a long time, and I did enjoy those years working alongside you. So
brilliant,
great stuff.
Thank you for that. Yeah. So Peter, I know a lot about you. We worked together, and we've kept in contact. So for the benefit of our audience, can you give us some background and tell us about Pete Morrell and what you're doing now?
Yeah, well, I mean, my background. I start sort of going back to my first roles. Really, I'm a trained electrician. I did an industrial electrical apprenticeship way back in the year dot, and did that for a few years, and then I joined Satchwell in 1985, I think it was, and spent almost 20 years there. First as a service engineer, looking after controls and building management systems and so on, and then went into operations management and ultimately into sales and working for your good self for a couple of 3 years there. I got a lot of experience, obviously, in building management systems. And at that point, 2005, I think, I moved on to work at Team, which is where I am at the moment, as an account manager, looking after the Southwest region. And I've remained there for the last 16 years. I'm the sales manager at team now, so looking after a team of people and a number of key accounts myself, and that's been good. And I've actually found that working at, or having spent 20 years in the building management field, has helped enormously, and still does today in what I do today at team, where many of these, the people looking on will know that we do software and build validation bureau and energy consultancy. But actually, the link between that, the monitoring side of energy, which we do a lot of here at team, and the link to that back to building services and the way that building management systems operate building services, I found absolutely invaluable to understand that link between the two.
Yeah.
And just being able to try and picture what's perhaps going on in a building when you're looking at a profile from a half-hourly meter, for instance. And I've just, I think it's helped enormously.
Yeah.
So that's really what I've been doing, work-wise. In my personal life, I'm a big music fan, and I go and watch Bath rugby, water sports as well. I live on the south coast, so really interested in getting into quite a few different water sports too.
So hence the amount of mileage, because you was right on the south coast, and most of our business was in and around London, because you covered the south, didn't you, when you was working for me?
I did, yeah, that's right. So yeah, when I was working for you, I think I lived in Southampton at the time.
That's right.
I'm actually in Christchurch now, in Dorset, near Bournemouth. Moved here about 7 years ago or so, 7-8 years ago. I was doing that from Southampton at the time, so commuting in and out of London on the train into Waterloo, and so on, and doing a lot of miles, as you say. It was myself and Alid, wasn't it? I think covering the north, and I did everything up to, crikey, well up into the Midlands. I forget where the boundary was now. But
so going back to those days, we had some significant challenges regarding selling energy, and I always talk about this regarding, we was trying to sell concepts then, back in 2005, and it was quite tough selling those concepts. Have those challenges changed since you've been, since those times and then years have passed? Have you still got the same challenges, or are they gone now?
I think it has changed in that a lot more organisations are more focused on energy management these days than they were back then. I can remember thinking back then that year after year, you'd speak to an energy manager and talk to them about how they might improve their energy efficiency in their buildings. And they'd say, but I don't need to bother. My budget next year is to save X amount of pounds. And I've just renegotiated my contract and I've managed to achieve that. So I don't really need to worry. And that was, I remember that was one of the big barriers we had back at the time. Obviously, that the marketplace is quite different now, especially now. Obviously, there's this big focus on net zero, and COP26 coming up shortly and everything. So there's an awful lot more focus on actually making a difference with energy management and actually reducing consumption now. And I think that's quite different. So, and along the way, in that intervening 16 years that, since I worked with you, I think there's been an awful lot of legislation come out as well, driving a lot of things. That's driven a lot of what we do and a lot, how we respond to it. But so I think the arena is quite different now. It's still a challenge sometimes in terms of persuading someone to part with some money to do something, but I think people are beginning to buy into it now and just making knowing that something has to happen, because something does really have to happen now. So,
and you're right when you say about the legislation, because since then we've had the CRC. Then we've had ESOS, which has been another driver, and now we've got SECRA. So we've got these three legislation policies that are around that all large organisations have to deliver, and it's created a model now for us to work to. Where before we was really making it up as we was going then, weren't we, in those times? But now it's about cost savings and payback, where we did talk about that, but we didn't make it very sort of bold in what we was doing. We talked about the paybacks, but and going back to the point you said about I've already renegotiated my contract down, so that means I've already hit my targets. Well, what's been happening since then is energy's been going up, and people have been having different challenges, because how can they then hit their targets through the pricing they've got to look at it through consumptions more now.
That's exactly right. That's the only way they're going to these days. If they want to reduce their energy costs, they have to reduce their consumptions. And of course, we've got the other drivers as well now with regard to carbon and so on, a reduction in carbon emissions and so on. So it's quite different. Obviously it's helped businesses like Team, like your own business, to develop products and so on. So I think what's interesting though is that those things that we were trying to achieve back in 2005 and before, those things haven't actually changed in terms of the need to do things. I think people can get quite too tied up in this net zero thing in terms of we need to install a whole load of really new technology, and we need to do this, we need to do that. But actually, before you do that, there's an awful lot of other things that you can do. And those were the things that we were doing 16 years ago, and probably were doing 16 years prior to that, which is if you want to save energy, turn it off or turn it down. It's actually quite simple, and none of that has changed. And I think it's very easy to lose sight of that in the sight of all this new technology that's coming through, new tools and so on. So I think people would do well to look at that, because there are things they can do now. Yeah, we've got to get to a net zero position by 2050 or before, ideally. But there's still an awful lot people can do now with what they've got.
Yeah. It's funny because it reminded me of a story I had when it must have been circa 2008, 2000. And in fact, it was 2010. I went to see this organization, and this organisation was adamant that they was going to spend £90,000 on all this secondary metering. And I said, well, this is great. This is what you need to do, but you need to look at your main meters first. Oh, no, I don't need to look at my main meters. I've got a good understanding of those. I said, but you've got a very high base load. I haven't got a high base load. I said, well, based on what I've looked at in the past and my experience, you have. I put up their profiles, and they said, well, how can we manage our business just on those baseline, on those half-hourly profiles? And I showed them how they could do that, and they just didn't get it. And then when the penny dropped, they started getting embarrassed that they wanted to spend all this money on this secondary metering when they could manage it on their main meter. We didn't get the business in the end because they were saying we'd embarrassed them. And that's what I found I was doing in those 2005 and going forward from there, is we was embarrassing organizations by looking at that data. But now they've passed embarrassment. They need to address these issues.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's it's a very fine line, isn't it? I mean, we find ourselves in a slightly different area with things like our bill validation bureau that we do. It's you're going into people and saying, well, actually, have you how do you go about validating your bills? And we're very conscious of the fact that actually we might be actually talking to people who might lose their jobs because of what because we're doing a bureau service, and we're very mindful of that. Obviously, that's the last thing we want. But it's more about saying, well, okay, well, let's take away those difficult things that you find that you're spending a lot of time doing. Let's take those things away from you so that you can get on with your core business and worry about that, and let us do all these other things. So, it's a very fine line, isn't it? I think sometimes when you're bringing to light things that people might want to do.
And do you know, on that subject, billing is one of my biggest things that I focus on. When I do I always look at review first of all, and I review their bills. The amount of bills recently, 2 large organisations, their bills have never or always been estimated. It's shocking to find that. And in each case, so this last organisation, they've got a meter, but it's not accessible. They've actually got glass and a panel in front of it. The first one I found, they couldn't gain access to it because they didn't know where it was. And it'd never been read. The first one had a massive rebate, and the second one has to pay a load of money. We need to get this right. These are the fundamentals of, just looking at your energy management, first of all, and just looking at the simple things, first of all. And
I think you're right. Sorry, go on.
No, it can be embarrassing for the facility manager at that time. Yeah.
No, I think you're right. These things they do need to be checked. And I think one of the barriers we come up against is persuading people that actually bills do need checking. Some people say to us, well, if I say, okay, if you do them this year and you check them and you put them right and you speak to our suppliers and you fix the problems and you get rebates or whatever, well, they won't make the same mistakes next year, will they? Well, yes, they do, strangely. And the reason they do is because they just don't have the resource to be able to learn from the things that, when we highlight a billing error, they don't learn from that necessarily. They just say, oh, yeah, sorry, we made a mistake. Here's some money back. That's what they do. And they don't have that learning, or it's not widespread, certainly. I think there's one or two suppliers who are better than others, but it can be quite a difficult thing. So that bill validation thing needs to carry on year after year to make the most of it. And the savings, as you know, if you're looking at it, can be very, very significant. And this actually relates to when we first talked about doing this, we were talking about data. I think was one of the things we talked about, wasn't it? And actually, that this is key to having that data. Billing is one source of data. And making sure bills are right. Well, to make sure a bill's right, you need to know the bits that make up that bill, and on all the published data that sits behind it to make up things like network charges. You need to understand all of those. And energy management, you need to be looking at half-hourly data. And when you're making decisions on, is this bill right, or is this half-hourly data? What's this half-hourly data telling me? It needs to be good quality data. It needs to be accurate data to make sure that the meters that are hooked up on site are calibrated correctly and have the right conversion factors on them. So you're looking at a kilowatt of energy, not 10 kilowatts, or vice versa. It needs to be complete as well. So a complete set of data. Otherwise, how can you tell? Consistency is something that we find a difficulty with of data. And if you're loading masses of amounts of half-hourly data from a source, if the structure of that data suddenly changes, then your automated importing routines don't work. So that's another issue, I suppose. And making sure you've got it on time as well. Is a big issue too, making sure you've got the data on time. Otherwise, you can't meet your reporting requirements. So there's a lot of things that are going on with data. It's absolutely key. And if you can get a complete set of data, as I said, stored, you can use it many times over. You mentioned yourself about the legislation, CRC, display energy certificates is one you didn't mention, but DEX, CRC, ESOS, SECA, they all need data. And if you've got that data in one place, you can use it many times over for different things, and it's just great but you've only had to store it once. Just make sure it's right
verified. Yes,
exactly.
It's been verified.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Going back to the the organisations saying, can they make these mistakes again? Well, yes, they can, because they changed their billing systems. I see a lot of that. I also see the fact that you're going to move. You're not held to that contract. You might renew with another supplier where they've got to learn all the learning curves again. It doesn't mean they're going to get it right every time. And it's the VAT could be wrong. The amount of times I've picked up the VAT that has been wrongly allocated. There's loads of issues. There's 101 different issues, and they're all not the same, are they?
They're not at all. I mean, we've got I don't know how many it is now. Actually, we've got 130, 140 different validator tools built into our software, which we apply to supply, to bills as they get loaded in. We don't put them all in necessarily, but we've got that armory of that many different tests, if you like, against any bill that goes in. So there's all sorts of things that can go wrong and do go wrong with it. So it's well worth doing. Yeah.
So Pete, the interesting point here is that as well, this is a global broadcasted podcast, and I'm finding these stories around the world where we've got issues. It's not just the UK. Some of the other countries have adopted UK processes, but we are seeing the same issues regarding this throughout the world. And it's quite interesting. We just, we always treat ourselves as this little island as such, and with our own problems, but these problems are global. And it's important that we learn about this globally. That's why I'm bringing energy experts from around the world. And it's interesting, these stories that we have that can help other energy experts to understand that the issues that can be found on billing. And there's organisations like yourself out there that can support that. So you as an organisation, do you do other countries?
We don't at the moment. Actually, we have sold software overseas. I mean, we've got some organisations over in Australia who use the software, in Portugal, in Africa, actually, one or two of the African countries as well, who've used in the past have used it. We don't actively sell into to overseas at the moment. I think, crikey, was it 4 years ago now? We were our managing director, Paul Martin, who you may remember, basically wanted to retire. He sold the company, a company called EDW Technology, bought team. They're also based in Milton Keynes. Also in the energy industry, that they do electricity billing systems essentially for electricity supplies. So they write their own software and so on. So there are a lot of synergies for us, and they've actually come on board 4 years ago, and to be fair, invested enormously in team to bring back the software to where it once was, which was a market leading piece of kit. And that's absolutely been the case. So they've invested hugely in the software in our bureau services and in currently in the energy management services as well. So to really transform team as an organisation. So they have been, but in doing that, what we decided to do was actually get it right for the UK market first, and get it absolutely right, so that it was again best in class, if you like. So there was a focus on doing that. And what we didn't want to do was start thinking about, well, how do we do this in France, in Spain, in Germany? So we had to think about, obviously, different currencies and so on, if we're doing bill validation and so on. So we took the emphasis off of overseas and focused on the UK and said, well, let's get this absolutely as best as we possibly can for the UK. And that's really where our focus is right now.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not to say we won't start looking overseas again, but for the moment, that's where we are.
Yeah. It's interesting you say about the Milton Keynes, because that instantly triggered me about the old days again, because we were based in Milton Keynes, weren't we, for a short period of time when we was working for IMServe.
IMServe, well, bizarrely, Teams offices, we've moved now, actually, in the last year, but Teams offices were, you literally would look out the window and see IMServe across the road.
Right.
It literally was across the road from IMServe, yeah.
Right.
So yeah, it was odd going there for quite a few years to think, well, actually, I used to go and sit in that office over there and knew a lot of the people in there. So yeah, and in fact, we share staff as well. There's I say share staff. We have a number of IMServe people working in team over the years. There's still a few there. So yeah,
and they bounce backwards and forwards. What challenges are you working on now for the future? Where do you think this industry is going to go regarding billing?
Sorry, regarding
the billing process and the industry now, where do you think billing is going to go now in the future?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? I mean, there's right in the immediate future, there's new legislation coming through, or new regulations coming through, particularly on the network charges, the non-commodity elements of that, which are going to fall into place next April, some of them, and then potentially the following April, some others.
And so TCR, TCR review.
Yeah, so it's going to be. I mean, it's always been important that people have the right available supply capacity set on their supplies, on their half-hourly supplies. It's always been important to do that, but I think even more so now, with the new charging mechanisms that will be coming, it's even more important that they get into the right available supply capacity. Because of the banding, you can be just above the wrong side of a band barrier, and end up spending thousands and thousands of pounds more a year than you really need to. And again, that comes, knowing whether you're the right side of the boundary, is down to, well, what have we been using? What is our available supply capacity, and what has our MD been, and what's it likely to be for the next X years? And if you can do something with those, then there's a potential for customers to save huge amounts. So
one thing I notice with the industry, it's very complex and confusing. Are we ever going to see it become a lot easier and a lot more straightforward, or is this TCR that's just going to be launched? I think I've read through it, I'm an expert, and I'm trying to get my head around it. And for the customer's point of view, it's going to be quite tough unless they're engaging with a broker or another expert to help them through that stage. Are we ever going to see all this complexity disappear and it be a lot clearer?
I suppose my opinion is, I suspect not. I mean, it might change. I still think it will carry on being quite complex, if I'm perfectly honest. Would I like to see it simplified? Absolutely, I would. Yeah. But who knows? I don't know. I mean, I think we are in a particularly good position with regard to that on the electricity market in particular, because of our involvement with EDW Technology, who are because their business is in providing billing systems to the electricity market. They have to understand these things intimately, to the extent that their systems produce bills, so they have to build the bill from all the component parts. So we have guys within EDW who and they cross over to Team who bring that expertise to Team. So we understand those sorts of things intimately, and then if there's anything that affects that might impact on what Team Sigma does, then we get that up front, and so we've got the opportunity at an early stage to develop Sigma to make sure that we're handling that new information correctly when those new bills start to arrive. So we're in a particularly good position, I think, with regard to that, because we have EDW's expertise. But yeah, I would love to see it simplified, but I
agree with you.
Probably not in my lifetime.
I was thinking that as well. I don't think we're going to see that in our careers.
No.
And especially while we've got more than one supplier, and we don't want to go back to one supplier. But I think we will not see that because of the multitude of suppliers and the differences and the competitive side of it. We would always see differences, and the confusion will come with that, unfortunately.
Yeah. Sadly, I mean, the complexity is there, isn't it? And I think inherently in what the industry stands for, there's an inherent complexity there that is difficult to overcome. I mean, water industry is quite similar. That's has been quite a mess, I think it's fair to say, in recent years, since the opening up of the water industry in England. In a similar way, is very, very complex and very difficult to understand. I think that's true of the electricity market as well. Not so bad in the gas side of things, I don't think, but certainly in the electricity market it is. Yeah, so it does need experts, because I think people that have got they've got another day job. Lots of our customers, they're focusing on getting other things done, and they just haven't got the time to get their heads around these detailed things and understand them. And I guess that's why people like you and I are needed, really.
Yeah, totally great. So Pete, you've listened to my podcast, I hope, and then I always like to put my guests on the spot now. Sorry, but I always used to like doing that with you anyway, didn't I? With my daily phone calls.
I should have. Why am I not surprised?
So Pete, is there anything that you can give back to the industry today as a takeaway from your years of experience within the industry? Is there anything you can give back to someone today that's listening to this?
I think if I go back to, there's one thing that I always go back to myself, and actually it's not necessarily, I mean, it is something I apply to what I do now, but probably more applicable to what I did when I was in the BMS field, to be honest. And it was something I was told by my mentor, a guy called Dave Smith, who was my mentor when I was an apprentice
electrician.
Not Paul
Webb, your mentor.
No. He was much later mentor. Yeah. No, a guy called Dave Smith. He probably won't be listening to this, but I learned an awful lot from him. And one of the things he told me when I was an apprentice was never assume anything. And I've held that through my entire career, and I think it's done me quite well, actually. In especially as in days of as I was an electrician, looking at trying to fault find things, as a BMS engineer, trying to find what's going on. And just not taking things for granted and starting from scratch. I mean, that's something that I've held with me throughout my entire career, and I do still believe now. So never assume anything, and I think it's always try and help solve problems, because otherwise people will overlook the obvious things sometimes, and quite often those obvious things are the things that you need to be looking at. I think, I mean, that's one of them. And it's actually something that I talked about earlier about energy management, and this is a very simple thing as well. I think is it actually isn't that complicated. Yes, we've got all this technology stuff that we need to get our head around and do, but it's not complicated. And I said it before, to save energy, you turn it off or you turn it down. It's as simple as that. I'm not sure what else. You put me on the spot there, Paul. I'm not sure what else I can say.
But I would have stopped at the first one, but it was quite good to see you squirm for the second one.
Thank you for that.
I might let you go on and do the no. So yeah, it's absolutely. I've really enjoyed catching up with you. I missed the days of driving in the car and calling you up and putting the pressure on you, saying, "Look, where's your sales today? Who you've been speaking to? Give me updates on this one and this one and this one." And it was probably one of the most challenging times we had. But we took that business from, I think I can still remember the figures. It was 3,000 order book to 1.3 million. Me, you and Alid. It was an awesome time we had. And I really enjoyed it. I learned so much. It was great. I was your mentor. I think, do you remember the sales tapes I got you to?
I do, and I used to listen on those long journeys in my car. I used to listen to. There was about 12 tapes, I think. I forget the guy's name.
I found those. Tom Hopkins.
That's him. Yeah. No, I do you know what? I found them invaluable. They were all sorts of really useful things in amongst those tapes, and I would listen to them for hours on end while I was in the car. Going from one visit to another, and they were great. I mean, I've done some sales training courses along the way. Oh, just a minute. I've done some sales training courses along the way. I think 3 of them. I think over the times, and you learn something all in those. But I think those tapes, there were certain bits within those tapes, and you think, wow, what a brilliant way to do that. And I've often thought of that, and I still use some of those techniques today. I've probably forgotten many, in all honesty, but there are some that I still use.
I always remember the car one with the lady in the car showroom. She said, "I'm looking for, say, a Ford Escort," and the guy would say, "What color do you want it?" And as soon as she closed it down to say what color, he would have one out the back, and then he'd show her. And that was, getting them to say yes at every stage. The sales techniques that we learned in them days is very basic, but we had to do that because we couldn't sell energy. It was very hard. I think we were pioneers, Pete, to be honest with you.
Well, I mean, I think it was particularly difficult doing it in the business that we were doing it in because people, we were doing it as Satchwell / Inventus, if you like, and people knew and understood that, people knew what Satchwell was in the business. Well, you do controls, don't you?
Yeah.
Oh, blimey, do you do energy as well and wider energy management? Well, yeah, we do. And I think that was one of the big barriers we had at the time, wasn't it? About getting people to realize that actually we weren't just about controls, we were about a wider energy management capability.
And that's why it's so much fun, because we was talking to non-Satchwell companies, weren't we?
It was great. Yeah.
Really good
some of those are not about. I remember, we did some work, didn't we, with Woolworths and people like that who no longer about anymore, and but we did some great work with them while they were still around. So clearly didn't save them enough money, but
we did our bit though. We did our bit.
It was good. Yeah. No, they were good times, Paul, and I certainly learned a lot, and I have to thank you for that, as well as my mate Dave Smith, who taught me an awful lot of things as well. Thank you for that, and thanks for inviting me along to this podcast today.
It's really great.
Really enjoyed it. It's been good to talk to you again. And, hopefully, when all this madness sort of finishes, we can actually get out and about and hopefully catch up with you again one day.
Yeah, and have a good cup of coffee or something stronger.
Yeah.
So, Pete, I'd like to thank you. It's been a pleasure interviewing you today, and I would like to say, you and your family, please be safe.
Thank you very much, Paul, and to you too. Thanks for your time. Cheers.
Thank you for our special guest today, and thank you for our sponsors, B2B Energy, which can be found at b2benergy.co.uk, and Clean Energy Revolution, which can also be found either through various different social media networks. Type in #Clean Energy Revolution. That leaves me with one more thing to say. Be safe.